So again, these are just examples. We wanted to give people some tips and tools to use and to think about what are some of those regular exercises that you might try. So we pulled some of those exercises from my grandmother's hands to think about what are some things that might do well that might have a little bit of risk and be a little uncomfortable for people, but also allows us to build up and try these things collectively, but not things that'll be too uncomfortable that it would make people feel unsafe in the environment to do. One of those is mindful breathing. So beginning each session with some mindfulness exercise to just center and bring in a sense of calmness. A somatic check-in, asking people to pay attention to their bodies and be self-aware and talk about what does that feel like, and just ask them to notice or describe sensations or emotions that they're experiencing without judgment. There can also be a group grounding exercise where people are able to build this sense of safety and connection. One way of doing that is through guided visualization. And there's some prompts that Resmaa Menakem offers about imagining roots growing from their feet into the earth, or collective body scan where people are focusing on their bodies at one at a time. So as you know, we have shared different resources. There's some of those things that are guided that you can use YouTube to find if you don't feel comfortable or confident in guiding yourselves through it. So grounding and meditation can also be an opportunity to do those things. Having some sessions where you engage creative expression, and you could do that through artwork, writing, or embodied movement. So doing a dance. So some of you all, I know some centers really love to participate in hustles. Maybe you do a hustle before or at the end of a session to just get the body moving in a collective way. In gratitude circles, that is where, especially after the second or third session where people have been engaged, they might want to close sessions with a gratitude circle. So it brings back that healing and centering healing and cultivating a positive and supportive atmosphere after having some pretty difficult and heavy conversations. So remember, people are going to be walking away, going to work, or doing other things. So having that gratitude circle as a wrap up could be an exercise to try. Different people try different closing rituals. Your closing ritual could be the gratitude circle, or it could be something that you all do as a breathing, or something that is a reflection, a closing statement, preparing for the next section, sharing an intention for the week ahead. And as long as it's something that you all do every week, that you all come to know as a group that this is our ritual for closing the time. I shared that one ritual that I have engaged in is that at the end of each session, we will pull what the discussion question would be for the next week and remind everyone what that would be, and then take that time and be prepared for the next week and then close out. An empathy circle can also be a way for, as we talked about some of those outlines where you are having people share their experiences. In an empathy circle, that would still allow people to share those experiences, but you might use some sort of a talking stick or something that people pass around and they're holding while they share and others listen, and making sure that people have the opportunity to speak while others just listen and provide empathy. And then an affirmation circle. I really like these at the third, fourth, or even fifth session after people have gotten to know each other and can give words of affirmation and encouragement to each other and share things that they've been able to acknowledge about others. I mean, you could do that collectively in a number of different ways. Sometimes people use sticky notes, and everyone give a sticky note to each person in the group to share a word or something that they have done that they want that person to remember. And that can be a really great way to close out a 5-week session or 5-session book club. There are some somatic exercises that are present, and some of these are things that are specifically from the book that you might want to incorporate. These take time, and you would need to have at least 10 minutes to do this in any of these activities. So you might do them on separate occasions or all at once or in any combination of those. So in these, it really asks people to reflect on a specific incident. So in number one, it's asking people to think about when they were a target of a microaggression and to replay it from beginning to end. This is a processing, thinking about their body. What did they recognize? What are they feeling? How do they feel it in their body? What does the body do to let you know how it feels? All of those things. And then doing that when around committing a microaggression against someone else. And again, this can be deliberately, like maybe someone consciously did it or unconsciously. And in these moments, it doesn't necessarily have to involve race. So making it relevant to people in the center can be helpful. So if they say, well, I don't think I've done this related to race, but maybe they've done it against gender or social economic class. So thinking about those lenses and thinking about what that looked like. And again, this matters people replay the incident and then relive it again. So they're doing it twice. So we need to have time for them to think it through. And then the second time they think it through is when they focus on the body. So there are some questions that we wanted to offer as well, because we know that when we ask you to use discussion questions, sometimes that's easier said than done. But what we will see is a few questions for each topic. So for intergenerational trauma, we have questions such as, what are your initial thoughts on the concept? How do you see it impacting communities you are a part of or work with? Can you identify any ways in which you or your family might have experienced or inherited trauma? So remember when I said that sometimes you might pick a discussion question for the next week? So for example, if we were doing this, we would say, okay, we're going to pick, you might cut these up in strips, put them in a hat, and have someone pick out one of these questions, and that be the question that you all discuss, right? So how does Menakem describe the physical manifestations of trauma in the body? How can we begin to recognize and work through bodily trauma in ourselves and others? How might intergenerational trauma and its bodily manifestations affect individuals in a workforce development context? Or what strategies can be employed in professional settings to recognize and support individuals dealing with intergenerational trauma? So it has these different questions. We have some for exploring racialized trauma. I'll take a moment just for you to take a look at some of these. I'll read a few. How does Menakem describe the different ways it affects people of color and white people? What examples from the book resonated with your understanding or experiences? How do shame, guilt, and denial contribute to the perpetuation of racial trauma? Can you identify any moments in your own life where these emotions have played a role in your understanding of race? How have you experienced or witnessed racialized trauma in your life or community, right? We can ask, what initial steps does Menakem suggest for beginning to heal racialized trauma? Or what physical sensations or bodily responses do you notice when discussing or thinking about racial trauma? How can we apply these steps in our personal and professional lives? In what ways might racialized trauma impact individuals in a professional setting? And again, how can workforce development professionals support colleagues and clients, and of course ourselves, in addressing and healing from racialized trauma? When we get to the strategies for healing and reconciliation, you'll see specific questions that you can see there. And you'll notice that a lot of these are just replacing, like, how does he propose this? How can we facilitate healing? How do we cultivate these things? How can we incorporate these values? What role do you play? How can we be supportive of these practices and implement it? And how do we support each other? How have you or someone you know demonstrated resilience in the face of racial trauma? Those are some questions. Again, these are just a few, some suggestions. We invite you to take the ones that feel relevant to you and mix them up based on what feels like it can engage your sender the most. Applying embodied racial justice. Some things that you might think about in there is, what societal changes do you think are necessary to support embodied racial justice? How do we do that? What are the characteristics of inclusive and healing-centered spaces? Right? What's a specific action will you commit to before the next session? How can the group support each other in maintaining these commitments? Okay. One I really like is how can we embody racial justice and how can that lead to personal transformation? With reflection and integration, you're thinking about what are the most important insights. You saw that. You might ask, what areas or topics do you feel need for further exploration or understanding? What challenges? This is something sometimes we don't like to talk about, but really important. What challenges did you face as you tried to apply these principles? And if there were some challenges that you overcame, how did you overcome those? And how did the reflective exercises deepen your understanding of those things? So we have questions. If you're going through the broader outline, those are questions you might consider. If you're using the topics and following the books, we have some example questions for that as well. So some of the things like, what do you think about how that operates in our bodies rather than our conscious thoughts? What you'll notice is that in these questions, again, they kind of really flow with the chapters, whereas the topic-oriented ones may be those that you can talk about in many different ways. It doesn't necessarily require you to have the specific knowledge from the book, where these probably do require a little bit more of those, right? Another, if you don't identify as Black, what can you do what can you do or think about to truly imagine yourself in a Black body? But it also allows us to have some questions that really don't have answers to. And that's something you might want to think about as your agreement, to agree that we may not have a final answer whatsoever. We may just need to ponder on the thought, right? Are there benefits? Are there challenges, right? What could that look like? And again, telling people there's no final answers or right or wrong answers either. For the second session, some of the questions are about your thoughts and on the idea about unresolved trauma. Another question in here is if police bodies care about safety and survival and responding to threats, even if they're not real, what types of training do people think? Training, retraining, or interventions do you think might help police officers to see all bodies, including Black bodies, as deserving of their protection? It also says, is it scary to think that in order to change our place in the world, we have to face that our bodies hold unresolved trauma? And what coping strategies may we engage to support ourselves? You might also ask the question, what are ways you settle into your body when faced with difficult thoughts and feelings? That can give people an opportunity to share what they have done, what has worked for them in the past, and give some opportunities to share so that we can support ourselves in healing that pain and trauma in our body. The next session will focus on racial constructs, if you remember. And here it offers even some ideas about an article called Race is a Social Construct, and talking about some body practices on specific pages related to microaggressions. So that brings in those somatic exercises that I mentioned earlier. This one is something that you might consider when it talks about dividing working class, Black, non-Black people of color, and white people for one another and one another share interests. Why has that been such an effective strategy in upholding white supremacy culture? And so again, with each of these, as a reminder, because it's a book club in the workplace, best practice is to make sure it's applicable to the work setting and the things that you all are doing. Another question that you might ask in this session is, why do you think it has been necessary to invent different races of human beings, or was it necessary? So again, we can propose that it was necessary, and some people might propose that it really wasn't necessary. And then with implicit bias, thinking about those things, how do the messages you and others receive about Black people show up now in how Black people are treated by police, how your body might react when a young Black person approaches you, or how we might react to a Black person in distress? They also have some questions in here about what steps can you take to prevent implicit biases from resurfacing, especially in ways that are going to be adverse. Many of us have heard the statement, I don't have any biases, or I don't see color. And in this one, it might say, what might we say to someone in a response to something like that? And what could we do as a potential intervention? So again, we wanted to offer different questions that you can offer in the police and policing, having people have some discussions about alternatives to traditional policing. What has existed? Is there anything that we think we can learn in our society? What do you think about the idea of race? Again, it's very important to remember there's no right or wrong answer, but more, what do people think? Do they think it's possible to rid our police forces of biases, especially in the climate and the culture that we live in now? And then we have these different things when we talk about connecting it to our profession and considering our role and what others say about being anti-racist. What do people think about the debates about the role of that all of us can play? What do you know about different arguments that are made from different sides? And how does it view your relationship between your work and policing? Do you see a relationship between your role and policing? And then we threw some more questions in that have been things that, especially if people are saying, oh, we need to go a little bit deeper, or maybe you're finding that you have additional time or you want to take things a little further. It talks about some questions. How does the book explore the intersections of race, trauma, and the body? What stood out? What are some examples from the text? How does Menakem use polyvagal theory to explain the physiological responses to trauma? What are the practical implications of understanding the nervous system's role in trauma and healing? This will probably be a really interesting concept for people who've completed the trauma one-on-one training, because we've talked about our nervous system and how that impacts things. May I ask about how does it address the intersectionality of identity and trauma? How does Menakem incorporate cultural perspectives and practices into that? How can we learn from different indigenous and traditional healing practices in the context of trauma recovery? And then I love number 10, because sometimes we can think about what we're doing within ourselves and each other, but we also can think about how can we take these lessons to think about broader social change efforts. For some of us, we want to take it beyond our individual work and think about how this looks in our communities in order to take it through to collective healing and liberation. So we have these questions, we have these outlines. I wanted to walk you through it. I apologize if it felt like, oh, why are you reading all of these things? But I just wanted to highlight a few of them, and you could take a look at the slides and also take a look at the accompanying worksheet so that you can take this information and hopefully feel confident in incorporating a book club at your work site. And hopefully you can see some ways that this can be personally and collectively transformative. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.